I'll turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I'm delighted to be here with you all today to talk about the challenges we all face, whether we're going virtual, whether we're going to do our events in person, or whether we're going to try to do things hybrid. It's a challenge, but one of the ways that we address that challenge is by having some shared criteria. So you're going to have an opportunity to create those shared criteria. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what we've learned in this process over the last year and a half in terms of how we negotiate whether it's virtual. So I originally had 5 lessons. I've changed it, as you can see this morning, as I thought about it. Once again, as you do when you're thinking about your presentation, 6 things we've learned. One is there's no going back. And by that, I mean, we've had this experience of being able to use Zoom and all kinds of interactive virtual tools. And we've discovered that they can be very helpful, and they can save us time, they can save us money, and they can also give our members a unique experience. I'm working with a bar right now on finding a senior staff member, and the staff has been invited to submit questions as part of the interview process. And the most prevalent question that has been submitted is, are we going to continue to be able to work at home? And that's the question they're asking. So there's no going back. Attendance and engagement are 2 different things, whether you're in person or virtual. We've all had the experience of walking through or being present in a CLE program where most of the people are on their devices. In person, it's a little different because at least if you're on your device, and you're in an in-person program, you can pick up the visual cues. It's much harder to do that virtually, to pick up on the visual cues of what's going on. And here's something that sparks your interest, turn off your device and turn your attention. So having a lot of people in a program doesn't mean that they're necessarily engaged, and it's much harder to gauge that virtually. Like I can't read your cues right now as a speaker, and I have found that somewhat challenging to get through. The decision-making process matters. We have to be flexible in our decision-making. We have to be flexible in our board, and we also have to be consistent. And I think this is really important when we're giving guidance to our sections and committees, to be able to say that we don't have favorite children, but we've got some shared criteria that we want to make available, and we want to be transparent about our decision-making process, about the choices we're going to make, whether it's about our mock trial. We tend to think about this in terms of educational programming, but across the board, it impacts our pro bono efforts, our public service efforts, our public education efforts. And we want to be reflective of the decision-making also of our collaborative partners. Bad behavior is real. I've been doing this, as Sharon said, for a really long time. And I have to say, I've never heard as many stories from my bar professional colleagues or from the officers of bar associations of members acting out, whether it's at a board meeting or a committee meeting. Part of it is tension, part of it is stress, and part of it is the medium has sometimes led to bad behavior. And having some rules and some shared guidelines about how we are together can help prevent that. As Sharon mentioned, Zoom fatigue is a real thing. It's exhausting. If you've ever been on a Zoom that's taken 3 or 4 hours, whether it's an interview process or something else, by the end of that, you're fried because you're not getting the energy of the people in the room. So looking at opportunities to break that up and to address it and acknowledge it is very important, which is why we're creating breakout rooms this afternoon, and you're going to have a chance to talk to one another, because that's one of the things we miss the most. And finally, my 6th thing, as I was thinking about this again this morning, was we have a great opportunity to bring our members together to have some fun using the tools that are available and using the platforms that are available. So whether it's musical bingo, which Nabby is playing as part of its December member social event, or it's group painting exercises that was recently done, sponsored by the Pennsylvania Bar for its members, or it's been virtual museum tours. There are some opportunities that we otherwise wouldn't have had to give to our members in order to engage them and bring them together for a collegial opportunity. And so we don't want to make them the centerpiece, but we do want to know that they're available and that there's an opportunity. So for our first interactive challenge today, since Thanksgiving is next week and we're all planning menus or wondering what's on the menu of the wherever we're going for Thanksgiving, please hit the chat button. And in the chat, I would like you to type. Do not hit send until I tell you to do so. Please, in the chat, put your favorite Thanksgiving side dish. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to do that. So put that in. And I'm going to assume that everybody's had a chance to type it. Now hit send. All right, so we've got mac and cheese, we've got green bean casserole, we've got scalloped potatoes, we've got a lot of sweet potatoes, we've got lots of green beans. So if you are using the chat, oh, fried corn. Hi, Melissa, I'm going to your house because I love fried corn and I haven't had it in a very long time. So one of the techniques that you can use if you're managing a meeting on Zoom is to have this happen, to not have the chat be a rolling chat, but to ask your committee, your board, your team members a question and have them respond all at once. What that does is it brings the energy of the group up in a different kind of way than if everybody's doing it separately. So now that we know that everybody is moving towards the carb end of their Thanksgiving side dishes, we're going to move on and we're going to go to breakout rooms. And what I'm going to ask you to do is listen to my instructions. You'll also receive them in the breakout room. When you get to your breakout room, appoint a volunteer, leader, or moderator. Make quick introductions. Leader or moderator should take very quick notes, and you're going to brainstorm this question. For somewhere between 10 and 12 minutes, we'll give you a signal to come back and to share. In determining the format of a meeting, whether it's hybrid, whether it's going to be in-person only, whether it's virtual only, what questions should your organization be asking? And do not limit your criteria to apply for a meeting. Think also about mock trial. Think about your public service program, your public education program. What questions do we need to be asking as part of developing criteria about how we chart a path going forward? Go into your breakout rooms, discuss it, and come back, and we'll share the results of your conversations.
Back to the big room, I got to hear some really great conversation about some of the things that people want to know about before they try to make the decision as to whether or not to go live or virtual or try something in between. So I'm going to ask each of the room leaders to use the raise hand function and raise your hand so I can see you. And then I'm going to, Elizabeth's going to be the recorder of these things. And we're going to see what ideas each of you have come up with in your breakout rooms. I see Joy Gaines from she was in room 5. Joy, go ahead and unmute and actually let's share your video too if you can. There you are. And maybe talk a little bit about some of the questions your group came up with.
So one of the main questions, and actually it was said different ways several times, was safety, be it what the COVID rules were generally or the locations rules. And even if based on the size of the membership, if we could find a space that would be safe based on safety rules. We also talked about could it be held outside? What is the purpose or the nature of the meeting or gathering, and what activities are associated with it, and what is the convenience of the membership based on where they live, if they're traveling far away or work. And the last thing that we talked about was the staff's comfort and if they felt safe.
Great, thank you. Next I see Shannon Roberts. Go ahead and unmute, Shannon.
Yes, hi, how are you?
Good.
All right. Our group kind of talked about more about what we are doing in terms of if we are doing live events or virtual, and not necessarily the question that we were asked to do. But I think that we experienced a lot of the same things. We just talked about, you know, the locations and the price increases that the hotels were experiencing, and that they were trying to look at different venues and locations. And they were also looking at the how their boards felt about it, because a lot of the boards or the governing bodies were interested in having more in-person events as opposed to the virtual events. And then there was also some discussion about staff as well, and it was mainly about coming back to work, but it probably echoes here with what their safety feels in terms of their preference would be to stay at home. So it kind of combines into this as well.
Great, thank you. Ann Park, go ahead and unmute.
Yes, hi. We had a great group. I think one of the main things our group talked about is people's comfort level. You know, how comfortable are they getting back together in person? There was a great need, I think a great demand for people to see each other after all this time. And of course, you don't get the same kind of connections, the same kind of energy if you're on Zoom as you do if you're in person with other folks. So the folks are planning in-person meetings, large in-person meetings coming up, but you know, who knows what's going to happen with that. I mean, we all decided, I mean, we came to a consensus that we think, you know, COVID is here to stay. I mean, we're not really going back to how we were operating before, and how do we operate in that environment? There was some discussion of a hybrid format for meetings, but also discussion of the expense involved with that. So folks are setting up conference rooms with video conferencing capability to be able to do that in the future. And we also talked about commute time, how that's been a big influence in terms of deciding whether a meeting is virtual or in person. I'm in Los Angeles where commuting is ridiculous. So it's actually been a fantastic blessing, COVID in disguise, because we've moved everything onto the cloud, onto the web, and it's increased membership. We've had more engagement. We've had more people attending our events. So it's actually been, they've been kind of pushed into the virtual space by the pandemic, and it's been very interesting.
Oh, thank you. That's some great stuff. Shannon Sheldon, please unmute.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to my group. They were wonderful. The questions we primarily asked were what type of event. We're finding, my group found that people are more reluctant to attend 1-hour CLEs in person, they prefer those hybrid, or they prefer those virtually, but the big social gatherings there's a desire to attend in person. What are the COVID numbers going to look like? So if the event's following a holiday, you should be less likely to hold that in person because you may get a spike in COVID numbers. And then also, what's the cost? One of my group members participated, stating that if it is in person, the fees cover the costs. If it's virtual, it's essentially no cost, but the hybrid actually can be costly depending on the location to Zoom into that particular location. So those are the three, primary questions.
Great, thank you. I think we're missing one more of the breakout rooms. We have a leader or a representative. John Myers, go ahead and unmute. And if you can, hit your start video so we can see your face too.
Well, thanks. We were kind of the renegade bunch, and we didn't really elect a leader, so I've just jumped in here. But and I can't start my video for some reason. But
Okay.
we pretty much hit on those same topics. Another one we did talk about was technological capabilities of the bar. Whether or not you have the equipment that's necessary. If you don't, what's the cost to rent it? And of course, that kind of goes hand in hand with staff capability. And, do you have the people to be able to do it if it is a hybrid event? I will just say, from a personal experience point of view, we went entirely virtual on our annual convention last year, and it was extremely successful. We had higher attendance than we normally get with our live events, and then we actually it was very, very profitable for us too. But we're looking at doing some form of hybrid next year for our annual convention.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth, so what do you see here? Anything anybody left out?
So I think we've covered a lot of the territory that bars are asking, and something John said really struck me is the bars that have done hybrid meetings for annual meetings or any bench bar conferences. You have to double your staff and volunteer capacity to be able to make that happen, particularly if you're talking about a hybrid live meeting that's simultaneous. And bars have had different experiences where some bars found that if they recorded annual meeting programming or bench bar programming, that folks weren't watching it necessarily in real time, but there was an afterlife to it, that they were able to incorporate it into their library, where other bar organizations has found that the opposite is true, that members wanted to feel like they were there and participate by having a large screen in the room and having that interactivity within the room. So a lot's going to depend on the culture of your organization in terms of what's successful and what people are really interested in, and sort of going on feedback that you may have gotten along the way becomes a very important component of this. I also will say what people say oftentimes that they want is not necessarily when you go to deliver it that they will want. But I think the capacity issue and the cost issue for doing something that's purely hybrid, when you've got a lot of tech capabilities and internet access and bandwidth and all of those things, those can be a real challenge. And a lot of the platforms that give you the ability to be incredibly interactive are also, they're not inexpensive, but also weighing it as a longer term investment in what those opportunities are becomes really important. Does anybody, as part of the group, think that anything has been missed? So we've talked about location rules, we've talked about costs, we've talked about capacity of staffing and volunteers. We've talked about safety. We've talked about convenience. We've talked about accessibility. We've talked about the audience, and we've talked about what the subject matter is of the program.
Joanna, you have something to add?
Yeah, one thing I would say that was a common thread in our group was also that we've asked members to get a pulse on things, and people are really split. And so the question is how much weight to put on that. I think your introductory comment, or the comment you just made right now, was people may have a difference between what they tell you ahead of time versus what they do. And so what do you do with the data once you've asked people?
Yes, that's a great point. People are on one hand very often excited about seeing their friends and getting together again, but when push comes to shove, if they're given the option of not leaving their desk and saving on commute time and or even hotel and airfare, that they take that option.
There also can be a split that I've seen, and I've talked to my colleagues about, between what leadership feels is important and what members feel are the most important considerations. You as leaders are leaders because you like the camaraderie, you like being in person, you like being in the boardroom together typically, and you've created relationships out of your leadership positions, and that becomes very important. And so how do you balance that need for relationship building, board behavior, some of this bad board behavior we're hearing about, and I have a link to an article in my handout, it is because we haven't had that opportunity to build those relationships. So that becomes, but also your leaders are not necessarily your member. And so, and how your member is viewing it. So again, audience and purpose of the meeting that someone said, I think Joy said at the top, becomes very important.
Okay, so we have, it's time for the second breakout. And here,
Oh, goodness.
Each room is going to get a different scenario. And Elizabeth will give you a couple of more directions to it.
So again, we're going, and this is the wrong slide. I got to move this. Sorry about that. You will go back into your breakout room. You will get a scenario. Now we're experimenting today. So one of my closing tips is be flexible and ask for forgiveness if necessary. So you're going to get a scenario about a pro bono program, a leadership training program, a CLE program. You're going to get it in the chat. It mirror the one that you choose with the number of your breakout room. You're going to discuss the criteria that we've just discussed in conjunction with how you would proceed in the particular situation that you're presented with. And when we come back, we're going to call time and we're going to bring you back for a poll. And depending on our time, maybe a little discussion around your scenario. So I'm going to ask Beth and Brenda to send you back into your breakout rooms, and you will be able to discuss those criteria. That's a good thing, because that was sort of the purpose of the program, was to think about criteria and how we apply them. So all of your presence was not in vain. So that's good. And have you adopted in-person COVID protocols? What we've discovered is so much, like Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. Much of the discussion around what is acceptable and what is in members' best interest has varied based on what the state criteria are and what's been established by localities and following that. So it can be very different in different communities. And it also goes back to something that was mentioned in the first breakout discussion, and that is, what's happening, what are the numbers, what is happening in your community, and being very conscious of that and following those. Some organizations have been stricter, some have been are requiring proof of vaccination for events. Other organizations are not. So it's really across the board, and I'm sure that those board discussions have been very intense and very lively. And so this is sort of a sense of where we are and where your bar organizations are. Both NCBP and NABI have resources to help you in terms of establishing some of those criteria. NABE has been holding COVID roundtables monthly to help the leaders or the staff leaders in your organization guide your boards in making some of those decisions. Are there any comments that anyone would like to share based on the conversations that you had on your scenarios before we quickly wrap up here? If not, I'm going to share one final screen with you and sort of share some tips. As you think about going forward, and as someone said, we're not going back. COVID is here to stay. And how do we think about it? So avoid talking heads and create some interactivity. In the handout, I give you some tools for which to do that, whether they're icebreaker questions, whether they're interactive tools like the Miro board I showed you that allow for real-time brainstorming that people can see and do in small groups. Don't try to replicate your programs virtually and take something that was live and just slap it up there and say, we're going to do the same thing virtually. Think about ways in which to use the tools of virtual and what is suited, as someone said, for in-person to be able to optimize the experience. Create rules of the road and shared expectations around the event. So if it's a new event, I see the Sarasota County Bar Association is on this call. They did they did cake wars with their judges, a virtual cake decorating contest. And I mean, that was something that was incredibly creative, and they created some expectations around that it was going to be fun and it was going to be interactive. So also think about, as we talked about, matching format with the purpose and the outcome of your program. And don't be afraid to fail, and extend everyone grace. We tried some new things today. We wanted those scenarios to be specific to each breakout room. We found out in the process that we couldn't do some things that exactly the way we wanted to do them in terms of using jam boards in each breakout room. We discovered through the run through that it wasn't going to work. So we were flexible and we switched it up. Your members are going to be forgiving, and they're going to thank you for giving them some new opportunities. And also make sure we create shared definitions of what we want to accomplish, particularly as we're dealing with our collaborative partners and other entities. So I'm good.
Thank you so much.
Turn it over to Sharon.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I hope everybody got what we really wanted to share with you on this, and that is a really good discussion about all of the different aspects that really need to be answered before you can appropriately plan for a program. The kind of program that it is so important. The comfort level and safety issues of both the staff and your members. If you're thinking about hybrid, the sheer cost or the need for expertise, technical staff, et cetera, it's not as simple as simply throwing a screen in the room. So I hope that you got a lot out of it. In addition to what you did this afternoon, we also have in the chat, the slides are available to you. You can download them and use them to your heart's content. We also have Elizabeth's handout where she has a bunch of links to some helpful information for you. This program was recorded, and the recording will be available very shortly, within, we hope, a few days. So if you want to watch any aspect of that again, that will be possible too. We would love for you to complete the evaluation survey. If you can do it right now, there is a link in the chat box. And if you can just do it while you're finishing up thinking about it. When the recording is live, you will get an email that will have a link to the survey so that you can do it at that point. We'd like to remind you that we have a live and a virtual meeting for you, the mid-year meeting in February. It is live in Seattle in accordance with the ABA's mid-year meeting. And we will have a couple of weeks after that, a virtual meeting for whoever would like to attend virtually, or if you want to do both, you can do both. And if you are not already an NCBP member, we invite you to do so. The cost for joining is really, really very small, particularly if you're a small bar. It's really not much at all. We do a sliding scale. And you will be sent renewal notices very shortly, if you haven't already, for next year to become a member or to renew your membership if you're already a member. And finally, our next program, which is really, really exciting, called Future Proofing Your Bar Organization, Challenges and Opportunities for the Next Generation of Leaders. This is going to be interactive as well, with a panel of young lawyers, and they're going to tell you whether some of those favorite programs you have are just outdated and you need to move on. So we hope you'll join us on Thursday, January 13, from noon to 1 Central. And both Elizabeth and I are available for any questions you might have. Have a great Thanksgiving. Bye-bye.